All right, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of developers are really interested in,
Yeah,
and that's GitHub Copilot, specifically within Visual Studio.
right.
We've got this really interesting article that lays out exactly how to set this thing up and use it effectively. And I think our goal today really should be to make sure that people listening understand like what Copilot can actually do for them, how it can help them write better code faster, and all without having to leave Visual Studio.
I think that's a great goal, and this article's really practical.
Yeah.
It's like a how-to guide, which is fantastic because it means we can really dig into the nuts and bolts of how to get this thing set up, how to use it, and what sort of benefits you can expect to see as a developer in your day-to-day coding life.
Okay, so if we want to jump right into the practicalities, the article starts off by talking about, the essentials of getting Copilot up and running in Visual Studio. And I think a lot of people might think that it just comes built in or something, but it doesn't, right?
Hmm.
There are a few things you need to have in place first.
Yeah, so the article is really clear about those prerequisites, and the first and arguably the most important one is you need to be running the latest version of Visual Studio.
Okay.
That's really important, not just for, general stability and performance, but because the Copilot extension and all its features are designed to work with the most up-to-date version of the IDE. And the article even points out, the easiest way to make sure you've got that is just to head over to the Visual Studio website and download it directly.
Right, makes sense. Like you don't want to be running some ancient version and then things start breaking.
Exactly. You need a solid foundation.
So you've got the latest Visual Studio installed. What's next?
Okay, so the next thing is you actually need to subscribe to GitHub Copilot itself.
Right.
It's a paid service. It's not free. So you'll need to head over to the GitHub Copilot page and sign up for a subscription.
Gotcha.
Once you've got that sorted, then it's time to actually integrate Copilot into your Visual Studio environment.
And this is where Visual Studio's extension system comes in, right? I mean, for anyone who's used Visual Studio before,
Yeah.
extensions are kind of a core part of how you customize and add functionality.
Exactly. You need to install the official GitHub Copilot extension.
Okay.
The article sort of walks you through it step by step. You go to the extensions menu within Visual Studio, select Manage Extensions, and then in the marketplace, you just search for GitHub Copilot, find it, click Install.
Simple enough.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. But there's a really important point here that the article highlights, and that's that after you install the extension, you have to restart Visual Studio.
Okay.
That's essential to activate it properly.
Got it. So latest Visual Studio GitHub Copilot subscription, install the extension, restart.
Yep.
What's the final piece of the puzzle here?
All right, so the last step is to actually link up your Copilot subscription to your Visual Studio instance. So after you've restarted, you'll be prompted to sign into your GitHub account directly within the IDE, and that basically authenticates your subscription, and it unlocks all the Copilot goodness within your coding window.
All right, so it is a multi-step process, but it sounds like each individual step is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's not too complicated.
So let's get to the good stuff, like how does Copilot actually help you write code day to day within Visual Studio? The article breaks down into a few core areas, and I think the first one is maybe the most immediately useful, or at least the one that people are going to encounter the most, which is code completions.
Yeah, I mean, that's where Copilot starts to feel like a real-time coding partner.
Right.
It's constantly analyzing the code that you're working on, the variables you've declared, the functions you're in, even the comments you've written. And based on all that context, it starts to predict and suggest what you're likely to type next.
So it's like a much smarter autocomplete.
Yeah, it's more than just like finishing words, though.
Yeah.
The article talks about inline suggestions. And what that means is, as you're typing, you'll often see a suggestion appear right there in the editor, kind of in like a light gray text.
Uh-huh.
And to accept the suggestion, you just hit the tab key.
So it's trying to be really integrated into your flow.
Yeah, really seamlessly, like it's almost reading your mind.
And I can imagine that over a long coding session, those little saved keystrokes, they really add up.
They do. They do. And it's not just about single lines of code either.
Right. The article also mentions function completions, which sound like they could be a huge time saver.
Yeah, this is where it gets really powerful.
Yeah.
Once you start defining a function, you give it a name. Maybe you specify some parameters.
Yeah.
Copilot can often suggest the entire body of that function for you.
Whoa.
And it's not just random code. It's based on common programming patterns. It looks at the name of the function. It even considers those comments you might have written describing what you want the function to do.
Oh, wow.
So it can be pretty remarkable when it just nails it, when it generates exactly the logic you had in mind.
Yeah, so it's not just auto-completing, it's almost like it's doing a little bit of AI-driven design work.
Right. It's recognizing patterns and helping you avoid writing out all that boilerplate.
So Copilot is helping with the small stuff like individual lines, but it can also help with these bigger chunks of code, these functions.
Exactly.
Now, what if you have a really clear idea of what you want to achieve, but you haven't started writing the code yet? This is where the article talks about code generation.
Yeah, and this is where you can really leverage Copilot's understanding of natural language.
Oh, okay.
The article highlights using comments as a way to do this.
Right.
You write a comment in plain English describing the functionality you need, and then Copilot will actually attempt to generate the code that matches that description.
So it's almost like turning your thoughts into code.
Yeah, it's bridging that gap between the concept and the implementation.
And they have this really cool example in the article where they say, you read a comment like, calculate the factorial of a number. And Copilot can often just generate the entire code for a factorial function.
That's a great example.
It's like having a junior developer on hand who can just take your high-level instructions and write that first draft.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And the article also talks about code snippets.
Yeah.
This is where Copilot recognizes common code structures like loops or conditional statements.
Right.
So if you start typing the beginning of a for loop or an if statement, Copilot can often anticipate the rest and fill it in for you.
So it's taking care of the boring, repetitive stuff.
Exactly. And it's letting you focus on the more unique parts of your application.
So we've got completions, we've got generation, and then the article moves on to something called code refactoring, which is all about improving code that you've already written, right?
Yeah, refactoring is so important for maintaining a clean and efficient code base.
Absolutely.
And Copilot can analyze your existing code and actually suggest ways to improve it.
Okay.
The article calls them refactor suggestions, and they might pop up within Visual Studio highlighting areas where your code could be made cleaner or more readable or even more performant.
And it sounds like it goes beyond just simple stylistic changes. The article mentions optimization hints.
Right, it's not just about making the code look pretty. Copilot can suggest actual performance improvements and point out best practices.
So it's like having another set of eyes, maybe a more experienced developer looking over your shoulder and giving you advice.
Yeah, kind of like a built-in code review buddy.
Now, obviously, Copilot is a tool, and like any tool, there are ways to use it more effectively. The article has some good advice on this. What are some of the key things that people should keep in mind?
So the first thing the article really stresses is that context is key.
Okay.
The more context you provide, the better Copilot's suggestions will be.
Makes sense.
So things like using meaningful variable names, writing clear and detailed comments, and having a well-structured code base, all of that helps Copilot understand what you're trying to achieve.
So you've got to give it something to work with, basically.
Yeah, you can't just expect it to magically read your mind. You got to give it some clues.
What else?
The article also really emphasizes the importance of review.
Okay.
Copilot is a fantastic assistant, but it's not perfect.
Right.
You should always review and test any suggestions it gives you to make sure that they are correct and that they do what you expect them to do.
It's not a replacement for your own judgment.
Well, it's a tool to augment your skills, not to replace them.
And what's the last piece of advice from the article?
Well, they really recommend exploring the official GitHub Copilot documentation.
Oh,
It's a sophisticated tool, and there's a lot to learn about how it works and all the different features it has.
right.
So spending some time with the documentation can really unlock its full potential.
All right, so to kind of sum this all up for our listeners, it sounds like GitHub Copilot within Visual Studio. It gives you this really intelligent assistance in a few key areas. It helps you complete code as you type. It can generate whole chunks of code based on descriptions, and it can suggest ways to improve your existing code. And all of this is happening right there inside your IDE.
Exactly. It's all about making you a more productive and efficient developer.
And getting started is relatively straightforward. You make sure you have the latest Visual Studio, you subscribe to the Copilot service, you install the extension, and then you sign in to activate it.
Right. Pretty straightforward.
And then once you have it set up, there are these core features that you can really leverage to streamline your workflow. Things like accepting those inline suggestions, using function completions to speed up common tasks, using comments to drive code generation, and paying attention to those refactoring suggestions.
Yeah, and remembering those tips about providing context reviewing suggestions and checking out the documentation.
Right. So it seems like Copilot can really help you cut down on the amount of time you spend on those more routine coding tasks, and that frees you up to focus on the harder problems, the more creative aspects of development.
Exactly. And hopefully that means you're writing better code overall.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into using Copilot in Visual Studio, I think the big question for our listeners is to consider how this kind of AI-powered assistant could change the way you work day to day.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question.
What new possibilities could it open up for your projects? How might it allow you to focus on more complex challenges and really push the boundaries of what you can achieve with code?
It's definitely something worth thinking about. It's a tool that has the potential to be really transformative.
So yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. Give Copilot a try, explore its capabilities, and see how it can change your coding journey.
Absolutely. I think you'll be impressed.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, happy coding.
Happy coding.
All right, take care.